Hello everyone, I hope you're all well, and I'm just going to give you a lesson today. It's actually going to be the first lesson in a series of 3, and we are going to focus on Romeo and Juliet. As some of you know already, you'll have seen Show My Homework, that I'm actually focused on the theme of fate and destiny in the play. As you know, it's a massive theme, and I'm going to be talking you through it today and looking at the background to it, where Shakespeare might have got his ideas from, and then later on in the week I will give you another lesson and looking at more extract work as well. Okay, so we all know how Romeo and Juliet end up. There you can see the final scene. So before you do this lesson, you should have a good understanding of character and plot. There's probably no point you carrying on unless you really do understand who your characters are and what is actually happening in the play itself. So you should have done that before this lesson. And if you want to pause me here, if you want to go away and do some more research, you can do, and you can actually come back to this lesson. You might want your Romeo and Juliet text with you. You won't be doing any analysis as such today, but you might want it by your side just to refer to it. Okay, so what we're going to have a look at then is just really, before I want to look at the idea of fate and destiny, is just to remind you of the way the exam would look. It's quite similar really to the poetry, what we looked at last week. So the themes in Romeo and Juliet, you've got love, which is quite an obvious one. You've also got the idea of conflict. You've got the idea of young versus old, the idea that you've got leaders in the play, like Friar Lawrence, and you've also got the people who guide the young as well. It's not just about the fathers, the daughters, etc. It could also be about family and relationships, and of course we've got fate there. And it's also about honour and loyalty. Now there probably are other themes there, but I'm not going to be going through those today, because what I really do want to do is just go through the idea of fate and destiny. Okay, so the actual questions that you would get in this exam, and it is paper 1 of the EduCAS exam board. You've got your first question here, and it's worth 15 marks, and it says read the extract on the opposite page. So you will be given an extract from Romeo and Juliet, then answer the following question. What does the extract show an audience about Romeo's thoughts and feelings at this point in the play? Refer closely to details from the extract to support your answer, and that is worth 15 marks. And you wouldn't really spend any more than 20-25 minutes on that question. And the second question that you'd be given is, how does Shakespeare present fate and destiny in Romeo and Juliet? Now remember, I've made these questions up. I've just adapted them to fit in with what we're actually going to be doing this week. But you just have to consider they can ask you any question whatsoever. And also that second question, which is worth 25 marks, may not be related to the first question. In fact, more often than not, it's not related at all. It's a completely separate theme. So you can see that it's asking you to refer to characters and events from the play in your answer, and that is worth 25 marks. Notice that 5 of this question's marks are allocated for accuracy in spelling, punctuation, and the use of vocabulary and sentence structure. So really articulating yourself and making sure that your writing is coherent. Okay, so as you said before, we're looking at fate and destiny in Romeo and Juliet, and we are learning to analyse the writer's use of language and structure, and that's AO2. And you know this from what we did last week with the poetry. Same skills, but you're just doing it with a different type of text. Okay, so I'm going to show you the top 3 bands again, and just really what you have to do to get into those bands. So band 3, I can comment on and begin to analyse writer's use of language, form and structure using relevant subject terminology. Band 4, I can discuss and increasingly analyse writer's use of language, form and structure, as well as using apt subject terminology. So using subject terminology that you can discuss a little bit further. I think we talked about that last week in the nature poetry, about you don't just say it's metaphor. Why is that being used in that particular extract or that particular scene? And it's that idea that you're starting to not sustain it all the way through, but you're really starting to pick out and analyse what the writer is actually doing, in this case Shakespeare. And then your band 5, I can analyse and appreciate writers' use of language, form and structure, explore and evaluate the way meaning and ideas are conveyed, use precise subject terminology in an appropriate context. So that idea that last week when I talked to you about being quite perceptive and really trying to understand what the writer was trying to get across and what the intentions were, that gets you into the top band. That shows a real thorough insight into what Shakespeare was trying to show here. Quite a challenge that in 20 minutes. Okay, you probably noticed as well, there's nothing here about context, which is quite unusual because you would imagine that Romeo and Juliet, we do a lot of work, a lot of background work on the things that would have influenced Shakespeare, the idea that, you know, it was a patriarchal society, all those different things. Now, I'm not saying you ignore that, because you don't. Because the thing is, if you're asked a question, more often than not, you'll be asked a question, what does the audience think of this? So what might the audience be thinking here? And remember, you are the audience. So whatever you're thinking, that is what the examiner wants you really to write about. So it is useful. It's really useful to know your context and to know where the characters are coming from and how Shakespeare is presenting those characters. So please do not forget that. But in terms of the actual context or mark that you would get for poetry, you wouldn't get it for this question. Okay, so we said before we're going to focus on fate. I think I've said that about 4 times now, and I think you probably know that's what we're going to do. So really consider, you might want to pause here a little bit and you might want to think about, well, what is fate? What do you understand is fate? And okay, another word for it is destiny. There's lots of different synonyms you could use for the word fate. The idea that something is predestined, you know, something is prophesized maybe. So just have a little think yourselves about what you think fate is. Okay, so fate then. On the right hand side of the screen, you can see here that I've just given a very brief definition. It's the course that your life follows that is beyond your control and already determined. So a lot of people believe in fate, and I am going to talk to you about different elements, or rather different beliefs when it comes to fate, and what people would have thought years ago in Shakespeare's time in particular, what the audience in Shakespeare's time would have thought about this idea of fate and destiny, and where Shakespeare may have got his ideas from. And look at that in the middle. It says, sometimes the road of life takes an unexpected turn and you have no choice but to follow it to end up in the place you are supposed to be. And on the left hand side, I'm going backwards here. Do you believe in fate? Why? Why not? And that's something for you to answer personally. It's not going to have any effect whatsoever really on your response, because what we're being asked to do is how Shakespeare is creating something and how the audience is reacting to how he creates those characters and those themes. In the left hand corner at the top, you can see I've got just some key words there, just the word fate, predestined and wheel of fortune, which is what I will talk to you about on the next slides. Okay, so we don't know this for a fact, but there are different ways of looking at how people believe in fate, because if you imagine you know, in British folklore, going back a long time, people didn't really understand why we were here, you know, and they needed explanations. They needed explanation why we had these things. So perhaps Shakespeare, and the reason why I say this, and he doesn't actually mention this in Romeo and Juliet, even though fate is a massive theme and we know that, and we'll talk about the prologue in a minute, but he would have been influenced by British folklore, and in particular there's something here called the 3 Fates or Moirai, and they're Greek mythological figures. And the reason why I'm telling you this is because, as you know, Shakespeare wrote Macbeth, and we had 3 witches in Macbeth, and people very much believed that they would have had a huge influence on the character of Macbeth. And, you know, is it the prophecy that makes him behave the way he does, or is it his character itself that makes it him behave that way? So here we go, the idea that Shakespeare may have got some of his ideas from this type of Greek mythology idea. So as you can see, it's 3 different fates represented by women, or goddesses, or prophetesses, as you want to say it. So you had here Clotho, who was the spinner, who spun the thread of life and decided the material it was made of. Atropos, which means the inevitable, the cutter of the thread of life. She chose the manner of each person's death and when their time was to come. And Lachesis, which is the drawer of lots, measured the thread of life allotted to each person, so what type of life that you actually had. So the idea that, you know, that one in the middle especially, I think a lot of people, especially people who you know, are religious and have faith, they believe that God is the one who determines your fate, and God will decide, you know, when your time has come. But different beliefs, and this thing threads its way through the idea of fate in Romeo and Juliet. So this idea as well about the stars. The stars are talked about a lot in Romeo and Juliet. You know, the idea is that we have star signs now, and I know we've talked about this in class before, the idea that people still believe in horoscopes today, and that's fine. People want to believe in that, that is okay. But going back to Elizabethan times, most Elizabethans believed in the idea of fate and astrology. Now, rich Elizabethans often paid for horoscopes for their children, and before major decisions such as marriage or travel, to see if the stars favoured it. And that's quite interesting, because we know that society was very much, especially for the rich, very much a dynastic society. So it was all about who you married and your social status, and they really did want to make sure that their daughters and their sons were matched up to the perfect person for their family. And many people also believed that they had no free will and that they had no choice to change their destiny, because everything was predestined. So that was it, your life was set out before you. And I suppose that's where the 3 fates come into it as well, and that's where Shakespeare uses that in Macbeth with the 3 witches. But anyway, that's later on. It's not really part of Romeo and Juliet, but he might have been heavily influenced by that. The Elizabethan audience would have been particularly influenced by this idea. So the other idea I'd said to you before was the idea of the Wheel of Fortune. Now, the Wheel of Fortune, now Fortuna is mentioned in Romeo and Juliet. And whenever they talk about fortune, sometimes with a capital letter, and it's referring to the goddess of Fortuna. So either Fortune or Fortuna. It refers to the unpredictable nature of fate. So this idea that everything's predestined, but it can also be unpredictable. So the wheel belongs to the goddess Fortuna, who spins it at random, changing the positions of those on the wheel. Some suffer great misfortune and others gain windfalls. So that's how people explain if you had bad luck in your life, that's why. If you became rich in your life, if you had really good fortune, that is why, because it was all down to the goddess Fortuna. Shakespeare sometimes referred to the wheel in his plays, although he doesn't in Romeo and Juliet. Can you think of any examples where the lives of the characters could be said to be influenced by the idea of the Wheel of Fortune? The idea that their fate is set out before them, that expects to behave in a certain way. You can pause me here if you want to have a little think about that one. But I would go down the route of this theory here, probably influences the play of Romeo and Juliet more. The idea of the Wheel of Fortune, and the idea that when Romeo particularly talks about things like, you know, fortune, I am fortune's fool. So, and I think Juliet talks about it as well. She says about fortune being fickle, always changing. So definitely I would say Fortuna and the Wheel of Fortune definitely influences Romeo and Juliet. Alright, so just very quickly then, I'm not going to analyse this extract today, but just to say to you about the prologue, and I think I've said to you before about this, the prologue is really, really important. It's really useful for you if you know key quotes out of the prologue, because probably any question you get about Romeo and Juliet, you could always bring the prologue into it, because it does link nicely with lots and lots of themes in the play. But mostly it does tell you, as we know, what the play is going to be about and how it's going to end. So already we're told it's all about fate, and it's already predestined. So the audience know what is going to happen to these lovers by the end of the play. So I've just got a few questions there about, what does it suggest about the thoughts and feelings of the audience at the time? This is something you can do yourselves. All I'm going to do with this really is just pick out some quotes that tell us that fate is mentioned in the prologue, but you can probably see it yourselves anyway as you look through it. Another thought, is it down to fate that Romeo and Juliet end up dead, or is it something else? Is it the decisions that they make? Is it the path that they take? You've got to think yourself, what is the audience thinking about this, and how does Shakespeare produce these ideas throughout the play? He kind of does it gradually throughout the play, doesn't he? And who is most to blame for the deaths and why? Is it fortune? Is it the stars? You just have to have a little think about that. And again, there's no right answer for this, but you just need to be thinking about what the Elizabethan audience might have been thinking, okay, at the time. Okay, so there you go. You've got the idea of the fatal lines, haven't you? So this idea that already, before they were even born, the idea that, they weren't meant to be together because they were enemies. They were enemy families, so they should never have been together in the first place. So it's that idea that the fatal lines, the idea that it's going to produce death. Because the idea of fatal as well does mean death. The idea of fate doesn't always mean death. Okay. Also as well, the idea of star-crossed. So there you go, the idea of reading in the stars. So Elizabethans believed that your star was guiding you in the right direction. So wherever your star took you, or the stars took you, then that was your fate. And then if they crossed over with someone else, then you were not meant to be together if that was the case. So the Elizabethan audience would know this as soon as they heard the prologue and the chorus talk about star-crossed love. Sorry about that, everyone. Okay. And their death-marked love. So there you go. So already the idea that they're going to fall in love, but it's death-marked. It is going to end in their death if these two get together. These two should not be together at all. Just goes to show that love is stronger, and that is what is shown between these two lovers, that no matter what they think that what they're doing is wrong, the love for each other overpowers them so much that they do make the decisions that they do. Okay, so I just want to really talk to you about the characters, because all the characters in the play, even if you think that they're minor, they will have something to do with fate. So what I'm going to do is going to talk you through the characters very quickly, and maybe you can test yourselves first. Put me on silent if you want to put all the pictures up and see if you can remember who is who, okay, in the play. But I did say to you, make sure that you do know the characters before you do this lesson. So there we have Lady Montague, Lord Montague, Romeo himself, we've got Lord Capulet, Lady Capulet, Paris, the nurse, Prince Escalus, Tybalt, Benvolio, Juliet, Mercutio, and Friar Lawrence. Okay, so again, I'm not going to go through the family tree. I'm not going to go through with you, but you can see the way it's split, actually, the screen, that you can see kind of, where people are in that scene. Okay, so how is it then? So what do we actually look at here? So let's have a quick look at this. So Lady Montague then, so how can she show fate? Well, actually, she takes her own life. She takes her own life when she finds out that Romeo has been banished, and that's something that a lot of people don't realise has happened to her, and it is revealed by Lord Montague towards the end. So you can say there, because she's taken her own life, she's actually changed her own destiny there. Quite a minor thing in the play, in terms of we could miss it quite easily, but it's that idea that you don't do that doesn't happen. Elizabethans would not have believed in that at all. No one could take only God could take your life, or whatever was in the stars. Lord Montague, he is unable as a patriarchal figure to change Romeo's fate. So the idea that it is a patriarchal society and the men, you know, has a lot of power, didn't they, a lot of presence, yet, you know, Romeo is banished by the prince who is at the top of the hierarchy, and yet Lord Montague is unable to change that fate because it's already set out for Romeo. Lord Capulet, as we know, he changes Juliet's destiny when he suddenly decides that she will marry Paris, but of course we know that she can't because she's secretly married to Romeo. So he is almost a catalyst there, and he's trying to change the path that Juliet is already on, yet he does not know that. Lady Capulet, she's unable to help her daughter. It's her destiny to obey her husband, so she's already got predestined to behave in a certain way because she's female and she's in a patriarchal society, so she's unable to help her daughter there. Paris, his destiny is to marry well due to his social status, and the lovers take that away from him. So the idea that he does not get what he wants because already Romeo and Juliet have defied the stars and gone against everything. So it's almost got a domino effect, and it's affecting, or a ripple effect if you like, and it's almost affecting all the other characters on the periphery as well. The nurse knows Juliet's dilemma, but she is willing to change this path for an easier life when she advises Juliet to marry Paris. So even though she knows that this is now Juliet's destiny and she's got married in the eyes of God, you know, no one should take that away from you, then she actually decides, just for the easy life, to say, you know what, just marry Paris. So she is actually changing, or trying to change, Juliet's path. Prince Escalus, he does attempt to create balance. Some do comply with him and some don't, and of course at the end all are punished, because if they're going to go against what is normal and what is how they should be behaving, then this is what's going to happen to these people. And of course Elizabethan audience would think, well, yeah, it's right, because it is written in the stars that they are all supposed to behave in a certain way, and because Romeo and Juliet don't, everything else is kind of has a massive impact on that. And Benvolio. Now, we know that Benvolio is a good character. He does attempt to keep order, but he's always guided by the stronger characters. So he is a bit weaker in that respect, and he's unable to change other things in the play. And Tybalt, ironically, the villain in the play, he's actually one of the few characters who does what's expected of him. So you could almost argue here that Tybalt, when he challenges Romeo to a duel, that was what was expected of him. That was the right thing to do in Elizabethan times. The idea that he was going to go out and duel with Romeo doesn't necessarily suggest that he was going out to kill him, but of course it all just goes wrong there, doesn't it? And at that point, things do change for the lovers. Mercutio, you could argue he's a catalyst in the play as well, because he just does what he wants. He is very much an independent character. Because of that, perhaps it's his downfall. That's something you would obviously go into depth with Mercutio. But, you know, as a result of that, he actually curses the families, doesn't he? He says, a plague upon both your houses. And at that point, the audience know that this is it. This is the path now towards the lovers' deaths. Because, of course, we know at the beginning, don't we, that they're going to die. Okay. And Friar Lawrence. Now, he's got good intentions in the play. But even he, as a man of the cloth, as a man of God, should not be going against what is right. But then, you know, he does realise in the end that his good intentions were overpowered by a greater intervention. And we'll talk about that quote a little bit later on. He realised that he shouldn't have done this. He didn't have the power to change what really was predestined for these two. And as you notice here, I've not written anything about Romeo or Juliet because I'm going to be talking about them on the next few slides. Okay, so some quotations here. Now, you might want to go away yourselves and think about where else there's some quotes. These are the main ones really in the play itself. So there you've got at the prologue at the beginning, like we said before. So from forth the fatal loins of these two foes, a pair of star-crossed lovers take their life. Act 1, Scene 4, some consequence yet hanging in the stars. So Romeo, before he goes to the ball, has a dream and he feels that something bad's going to happen. And this is what I said to you before, you know, both of them have this idea that something is going to go wrong. They have what you call a premonition. And yet, because that idea that of love is so overpowering, that emotion is so overpowering, they choose to ignore it. And they choose to ignore it, and yet you can see the consequence at the end. So, Mercutio, Act 3, Scene 1, a plague on both your houses. Because, of course, the curse of a dying man 3 times. Know that you are in for a bad ending. And Act 3, Scene 1, again, is when Romeo has killed Tybalt and he says, I am Fortune's fool. And there you go. That's the idea of the Wheel of Fortune and Fortuna. So I've gone against what she has intended for me. So this Wheel of Fortune has gone the wrong direction for Romeo. Or rather, Romeo has done it himself. Act 3, Scene 5. This is the one where Romeo and Juliet have just spent the night together, and Romeo's got to go to Mantua and he's climbing down from the balcony and she looks down on him, and it's the last time that they see each other alive as well at this scene. We don't know that at that point in the play. And she says, I have an ill divining soul, methinks I see thee dead in the bottom of a tomb. And again, premonition, again, foreshadowing what's going to happen, yet she does nothing to change that. Act 3, Scene 5, oh fortune, fortune, be fickle fortune. Again, that's Juliet saying about how fortune is fickle, always changing, never really making up its mind. I think probably perhaps fortune does actually make up its mind. It's just the fact that the lovers don't. Is it e'en so? Then I defy you stars, and that's Romeo when he finds out in Act 5, Scene 1 that Juliet is dead. And I place that in inverted commas because we know that she's not dead. And then Act 5, Scene 2, Unhappy Fortune. This is when Friar Lawrence really decides that, yes, fortune is not in their favour. Okay, and he has to do something about this. So Act 5, Scene 3, where is the dying scene, and it's when Romeo talks about the idea of inauspicious stars, you know, how it's cruel, how he can't rely on them, and he knows now that maybe they shouldn't have followed that path. There was only ever going to be one ending here. And Act 5, Scene 3, a greater power than we can contradict have thwarted our intents. And that's what I said before. Friar Lawrence had really good intentions, yet a greater power has taken that away from them, from that decision that he made. And that is exactly what the audience would have been thinking, that you shouldn't mess with fortune, you shouldn't mess with the stars, and you shouldn't mess with fate. So here at the side I've put, what do you think Shakespeare wants his audience to think about fate, fortune and belief in the stars? And I put, give the reasons in your main task. So in a minute I'm going to show you what tasks you're going to do, and you can actually start to use those ideas in it. But also go and see if you can find some of your own quotations. It's really good practice for you. It's really good revision. And go and find out a little bit more about fate, as long as it doesn't confuse you too much in the play. Alright, so what you're going to do, everyone, you're going to do a task here, and you're going to make it your own. In other words, make sure that you apply the knowledge that in this PowerPoint. Anything else that you've done, so far you've got this PowerPoint, you've got the Seneca Learning, you've also got your own research that you can do, and I want you to create a revision or knowledge organiser about fate in Romeo and Juliet. Now, include where Shakespeare may have got his ideas from, for instance, Fortuna, astrology, etc. Why you think Shakespeare wants his audience to think about fate, fortune and belief in the stars, which was the question I asked before. How characters are linked to the theme of fate. Key quotes. So an extra challenge, you might want to explode them if you wish, and don't forget your subject terminology, because that's what we're going to be leading to. So I suppose the more work that you do at this point on your quotations and your evidence, you can use it. You can use it in lesson 3. You can create it any way that you want, as long as it shows an understanding of how Shakespeare creates the theme of fate and destiny. So you can type it, you can do it on A3 sheet. I really don't mind how you do it. Get artistic. Like I said before, be creative. However you do it, make sure you send it to me in the way that I've been asking you to do it as well. So you can, if you're going to type it, you can attach it for me in an email. If you are going to handwrite it and draw and do lots of colour, then just take a screenshot of it and you can send it to me that way. That would be lovely. Okay, so that's where we're at, everyone, at this point. So that's the end of lesson 1, really, or session 1. So next lesson, what I'm going to do with you is I'm going to be doing the extract question, so the 15-mark question, and I'm going to give you a couple of options here because I don't want to overwhelm you with too much, because if you're spending a lot of time on the knowledge organiser or the revision sheet, then that's fine, because that's learning. That is learning about Romeo and Juliet, that's learning about fate and destiny. But next lesson I will go through and annotate the extract with you. So I will do that with you, and then there is an optional task at the end if you want to write the essay at the end for the 15-mark question, but you do not have to do that, but I will be telling you that next lesson. Okay, everyone, stay safe, and I will be with you again in lesson 2. Bye for now.